I knows there's a decent amount of posts about Dennis Rader. But usually those are just the strange pictures of him practicing autoerotic masturbation. So I figured I would make a post about his actual pathology. As in what makes an evil person like Dennis tick. My sources on all the information below are Confessions of a Serial Killer, The Untold Story of BTK, A Serial Killer's Daughter, Bind, Torture, Kill, The Inside Story of the Serial Killer Next Door, and Inside the Mind of BTK, by John Douglas. I'm not going add too many opinions. Just the facts about Dennis and his background. Sorry if it's long. I just hope it's informative. He truly was a disgusting human being. I'll start by saying, Dennis never raped any of his 10 victims. Dennis claims that he felt that penetrating his victims was disrespectful towards his wife, which is strange considering he's a serial killer. Dennis was a sexual sadist. He reached climax by watching them die, not by actually assaulting them. His pleasure was derived from the suffering of his victims, both physically and psychologically. His first murder, or I should say murders, was almost an entire family. On January 15, 1974, Dennis murdered 4 members of the Otero family. On that date, 29-year-old Dennis Rader, after many years of fantasy, committed his first murders. He placed bags over the heads of 3 of the family members and then took 11-year-old Josephine Otero to the basement and hung her from a pipe. Before killing her, he tried comforting her by saying, "You're going to go to sleep and see your mommy and daddy in heaven." That's from his mouth. He then hung her from a pipe, masturbated as she died, and then climaxed on her leg. Dennis also stated that he liked Hispanics the most and they looked sexy to him, which is what caught his eye with Julie Otero when he was hunting for victims. He had stalked them for months prior, while also looking at other victims. But unfortunately he ultimately chose the Otero family. It's important to note though, Dennis was not expecting the father to be present. He also applied a comforting tactic with all his victims. Here's a quote by Dennis about such a tactic. "You win if people think they're going to be okay, that they are going to be out of harm's way." Dennis would go on to repeat that more on future victims, giving them comfort to maintain control. That's also something other killers have done. Before becoming a serial killer, he spent years fantasizing about these acts before trying them out. He actually had 2 previously failed abductions before the murders began. Both times he panicked when the female fought back or wouldn't cooperate. And both times were in broad daylight in a public setting. This is what led Dennis to begin his comforting tactics. Because the first 2 wouldn't cooperate. Besides fantasizing about these crimes years in advance, Dennis was also highly interested in other killers. Before they were referred to as serial killers, his favorites were Harvey Glattman and H. H. Holmes. His fantasies began at 9 years old when he became interested in a female character on The Mickey Mouse Club, called Minnie Mouse. Except his interest was binding her. He fancied himself the werewolf or Dracula to her damsel in distress. Think about that. Where you and I might fantasize about conquering dragons or fighting bad guys in our childhood. Dennis fantasized about hurting a damsel in distress. Dennis had an impactful event involving his mother as he reached puberty. When he was 13 years old, his mother got her hand stuck in the sofa and she asked Dennis to run and get help. She was crying in panic. Per Dennis. Unfortunately, Dennis could do nothing but sit and stare. He recalled this being the very first time he ever felt sexual arousal. He went on to say his first time ever ejaculating was to the thoughts of that exact scenario. Involving his mother. His own mother. Meaning his mother was the first thing he pleasured himself to. He also started purposely getting in trouble just so his mother would spank him as punishment. Dennis was never abused, nor neglected as a child. He also claims he never harmed animals. Although he did admit to starting fires for the excitement. He grew to be obsessed with satin cloth, which he pictured binding women with. There's also a famous photo Harvey Glattman took of a victim bound and gauged. Well, that photo became important to Dennis because it was when he was just developing his ideal bondage fantasy. He would look at that photo and picture his mother as the victim. Or another dark-haired woman. Dennis would kill 10 people in total. All ranging from 9 years old to 62 years old over a 30-year period. Both men, women, and children. He had long cooling-off periods between kills, which is unusual for a serial murderer. It's important to keep in mind though that he was never really inactive. He was always hunting, stalking, or fantasizing. In my opinion, it was the fantasy world he built in his mind that allowed him to have the self-control during those cooling-off periods. He would have motel parties, which involved him cross-dressing in hotels while practicing autoerotic asphyxiation. As we all know, he taunted police and was finally arrested in 2005 after being tricked by law enforcement. Although it was really just stupidity on his part. He left behind 10 destroyed families. The destruction of his own family. And the shock of those close to him. Especially at Christ Lutheran's Church where he was a deacon. Keep in mind he actually took one victim to that church after she was deceased for a photo shoot. Well guys, I hope you found this informative. I tried to include as much pertinent information to the psychological aspect of Dennis while also not rambling. If you made it through, then I hope you found this informative. I attempted to give you guys a full picture of the depravity that is Dennis Rader.